But even with regard to the churches that Paul started in Galatia, Asia, what we call Asia Minor, look what Paul says later. So Acts 19 is one thing, but 2 Timothy was written, scholars think this was right before Paul died. I'm ready to be offered up. I've fought the good fight. I've finished my course with joy. So they say that he wrote this right before he's about to be beheaded. And Paul says in chapter 1 of 2 Timothy, "This thou knowest, that all they which are in Asia be turned away from me, of whom are Phygellus and Hermogenes." So back in Acts 19, Paul still has a lot of ministry to go. I mean, after Acts 28, Paul may have made it to, because Romans was probably written somewhere around Acts 20, Acts 22. Okay. And then Paul after that may have made it to Spain and England. Okay. We don't know exactly for sure, but he may have made it. So there was some things that go on with Paul after the book of Acts ends. Okay. And then eventually he winds up captured and he's going to be put to death. And he's writing 2 Timothy from jail where he's going to be killed. So he says, and by time he's writing, even while Paul is still alive, all those churches they started in Asia Minor, says, all they which are in Asia be turned away from me, of whom is Phygellus and Hermogenes. So my next comment was that there was a great apostasy in the churches that Paul started while Paul was still alive. We have this misconception that there's something impervious about institutional churches the further back you go and the closer you get back to the apostles. I just saw something on Facebook, I think earlier today, maybe it was yesterday, about historic Christianity, and they're talking about the Nicene Creed and all this. I'm like, I don't think you understand historic Christianity. I don't think you understand what was going on while the apostles were still alive. And the idea that the church was better or more pure the closer you get to the apostles is absolute balderdash. It is absolute balderdash. Yeah, we've got 45,000 estimated denominations today. If you Google it, that's what comes up, at least when I Googled it a few days ago. But it seems like it wasn't much different at the time. Even then, it is as new of a movement as it was. So what I want to do is I want to look at some of these facts. Let's look at some observations from Scripture so that we can manage our expectations from what we would expect from an institutional church, okay? So my next statement, this is actually from my notes from debating with Catholics, which I used to do a while back. Now, pay attention to this. While the apostles were still alive, they were battling false doctrine. While they were still alive, there were false brethren, 2 Corinthians 11, false teachers and false prophets, 2 Peter 2, false apostles, Revelation chapter 2, 2 Corinthians 11, people forging letters from apostles, 2 Thessalonians 2, and plenty of warning to watch out for and avoid deception, Matthew 24, 2, 1 Timothy 4, 1 through 3. Meanwhile, or as we say around here, nice while, because a nice while is better than a meanwhile. Meanwhile, the apostles gave instructions to mark and avoid people teaching false doctrine, causing division, Romans 16, 18. So they're already having trouble serious trouble by Acts 20, okay? To withdraw from corrupt, perverse teachers, 1 Timothy 6, to withdraw from disorderly brethren, 2 Thessalonians 3, 6, and to turn away from wicked religious people, 2 Timothy 3, 5. Furthermore, many people are warned against by name, such as Diotrephes in 3 John verse 9, Demas in 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 10, Alexander the coppersmith in 2 Timothy 4:14, Hymenaeus and Philetus in 2 Timothy 2:17, and to top it all off, even Peter, one of the authors of Scripture, has a pattern of needing to be corrected. like when Jesus called him Satan in Matthew chapter 16, verse 23. When he denied Christ 3 times in Matthew chapter 26, verse 69 through 74. And when Paul had to correct Peter, withstanding him to the face for legalistic dissimulation, as reported in Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. So all this stuff is going on. And so how much of this would continue to happen even after the apostles are dead? You hear people say things like, oh, it's Polycarp. That's, that's the Apostle John's disciple. So surely he was flawless. Have you looked at some of the disciples that some of these disciples had? Look at Demas. Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. He was Paul. Does that mean he's good to go? Alexander the Coppersmith, all these people. Think about it. Think about it. Put your thinking caps on. What I encounter almost every day is just evidence that people don't think. That's really what I encounter all the time. Let's think about this and start thinking about. Let's start modifying our expectations to understand this was going on way back then. Now let me ask you this: people think that, if I find a writing that dates early enough, that means it's most likely to be pure. Well, how do you know followers of Diotrephes aren't the ones doing the writing? You see, how do you know the followers of Hymenaeus and Philetus aren't the ones doing the writing? I'm talking about after, post-apostolic things that we don't consider to be scripture. We consider it to be church fathers, that kind of thing. I mean, how much influence did these people have? What about these false brethren from 2 Corinthians 11? What about these false teachers and false prophets? How much influence did they have? Did they do any writings? Are there any writings that those people's followers created that we consider to be the writings of church fathers? Maybe we've been reading bad guys this whole time. How would you know? See? Ever thought about that? I don't think a lot of people have. I don't think a lot of people thought about that. And so of the people that are, let's say they're following Jesus Christ in spirit and in truth, are they writing anything? So when we go back, we tend to have this mindset that the earlier the writing, the more pure it is. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever to think that way. There's no reason that something written in 90 AD that isn't scripture is any more authoritative or true or right or whatever you want to call it than something that somebody writes today. Absolutely no reason to believe it. Other than we've had, centuries and centuries of error, which may have also made their way in. But look, there's plenty of error. There's plenty of error to go around back then. So, okay, were any of them not garbage cans with clean and dirty water? Were Paul and the apostles starting garbage can churches? Well, they were starting churches that a lot of them turned to garbage can churches quickly, while the apostles are still alive. Look what Paul said. As Paul said to the Galatians, you did run well. Who did hinder you that you should not obey the truth? Paul's still alive, and that's what's happening to churches. You think that while the apostles are still alive, there's some magic beam somewhere that prevented anybody from being in any kind of error? No, there's plenty of error to go around. Plenty of it. All kinds of error being corrected from all the churches. This persuasion cometh not of him that calleth you. A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. Well, let me tell you what. You look at what this says. What does that mean? There's a lot of leaven going around. And that leaven is going around forever. I mean, it doesn't stop. Somebody might say, well, didn't Jesus say that on this rock I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it? And because of how passages like this have been used, we tend to think that some institution on the face of the planet will never, like Satan won't prevail against it. Think about this. Let's think about what this statement means and says. Do gates prevail? Do gates move? Think about it. Are gates on the warpath somewhere? When an army attacks someone, are they attacking with gates? No. Gates are somewhere that keeps people locked in somewhere. Okay. Remember when Jesus was talking about the rich man, Lazarus, going to what? Abraham's bosom. Okay. And the same place, Abraham's bosom, is often referred to as Hades. Okay. Sometimes the word in the New Testament is hell. Sometimes it's Hades. In the Old Testament, Sheol is the grave. The idea here is not that there's going to be an institution on planet Earth that can do no wrong or will never be shut down or anything like that. The idea is that the people who are following Christ, who are his called out assembly, won't stay in the grave. That there's more life than the physical. That's what this statement is about. Has nothing to do with the correctness of an institution somewhere.